How to make melee weapons in Godot. Start with a first-person character controller. I have a tutorial on FPS controllers if you don't know how to make one. Right-click on the camera node and add an area node as a child. I'm going to rename it to Hitbox. Next, we need to give the hitbox a shape, so right-click on Hitbox and add a collision shape node as a child. In the inspector, click on Empty next to Shape and give it a new box shape. This is going to be the effective range of our melee weapon, so click on box shape and change its size to suit your game. On mine, I changed the Z length to 2 and I left everything else unchanged. Click on the hitbox node and move it forward so that the end of the hitbox aligns with the edge of the player capsule. Don't leave any space between them, otherwise an enemy could theoretically get into that empty space and you won't be able to hit them even if they're right in front of you. Next, right-click on the camera node and add a spatial node as a child. Rename it to Melee Weapon. Move it forward so that it's approximately in the location where the character might be holding a weapon. Then right-click on Melee Weapon and add a Mesh Instance node as a child. Click on Empty next to Mesh and give it a new Cube Mesh. For this demo, we're going to make a sledgehammer, and so first we need to make the handle. Click on the Mesh Preview window and change its size and shape until it looks like a stick. Click on the Mesh node and move it up so that the Melee Weapon Spatial node is located near the base of the stick. This will be the pivot point for the hammer. Next, right-click on the Mesh Instance node and add another Mesh Instance as a child of it. Give it a Cube Mesh and adjust its size, shape, and position so that it forms the head of the hammer. At this point, you can add some colors to the hammer if you want, but I will leave that up to you. Once you're done, click on the camera node and click on Preview at the top left. Click on the Melee Weapon Spatial node, and in the inspector, under Transform, adjust its translation until the hammer is in a good spot. Now we can create an attack animation. Right-click on the main node and add an animation player node as a child. Click on the animation button and select New. I'm going to call this animation Attack. Change the length of the animation to 0.02 seconds and change the snap interval down at the bottom to 0.01. Click on the Melee Weapon Spatial node and under Transform, click on the white key icon next to Rotation Degrees. Click Create to create the first frame of the animation. After that, move the blue slider over to the last frame and rotate the hammer on the X-axis to where you want the hammer to be at the end of its swing. I went with -70. Click the key icon again to finish the attack animation. We also want to create a separate animation that brings the hammer back to its original position. Click the animation button and add a new animation. This time, call it Return. Change the animation length to 0.1 seconds. Change the hammer's X rotation so that it matches the final frame of the attack animation, in my case -70, and click on the key icon. Move the blue slider to the last frame of the animation. Set the X rotation back to 0 and click the key icon, completing the animation. Now we have an animation for the initial swing and a separate animation for the return swing. There's a reason why we don't combine these into a single animation, and I'll be explaining that shortly, but now we can begin coding. In the script, the first thing we're going to do is write var melee_damage equals 50. This is how much damage our weapon does per attack, so adjust this to fit your project. We're also going to create a reference to the animation player by writing onReadyVar melee_anim equals $animation player, as well as a reference to the weapon hitbox by writing onReadyVar hitbox equals $head/camera/hitbox. To make the hammer swing, let's create a new function by writing func melee open close parentheses. After that, go to Project and Project Settings, and in the Input Map tab, make sure you have a key binding called Fire. If you don't, go ahead and make one now. Then, return to the melee function and write if input.isAction just pressed fire, if not meleeanim.isPlaying, meleeanim.play attack, meleeanim.queue return. So when we press the fire button, the animation player will play the attack animation. Then once that has played, it will queue up the return animation so that it will play immediately after the attack animation. We also set a condition that the animation player can't already be playing before playing a new animation, so that you have to wait out the full length of the melee animation before you can do another melee. To test if this works, in physics process write melee open close parentheses, which tells the game to run the melee function. Run the game, and as you can see, when you press the fire button, the hammer swings. Now we need to get it to dish out damage. Back in the script, we're going to write if meleeanim.currentAnimation == attack For body in hitbox.getOverlappingBodies, if body.isInGroupEnemy, body.health minus equals damage. Feel free to pause the video if you need time to copy this down. Here we have a test enemy that I use in a lot of my tutorials. In the enemy script, you can see it has 100 health, and if its health goes to 0, it will die. Watch my video on hit scan weapons if you want to learn more about how these work. So the way the melee code works is that when we press the fire button, before we deal any damage, we first check if the current animation playing is the attack animation and not the return animation. The reason we specify this is because we only want the hammer to deal damage when it's swinging forward and not when it's swinging backwards. Otherwise, you could potentially deal damage more than once per swing. After that, we check to see if there are any enemies or bodies inside the hitbox when the hammer is swinging, and if there are any bodies in the hitbox, then we check to see if those bodies are in a group called enemy. In the test enemy scene, in the node tab under groups, we can see that it's in a group called enemy. And so if that's the case, we subtract from the enemy's health variable by the melee damage amount we specified earlier. So now when we run the game, if you hit the enemy enough times, it will die. And that's the basics of melee weapons, but as a bonus, let's make the enemy bleed when we hit them with our hammer. So here I have a new scene called Blood Splatter. It's basically a particle effect that emits red particles when active, kind of like blood splattering. I won't be explaining how particles work in this video, but you can watch my video on flamethrowers if you want to learn more. Anyways, back in the script, we're going to create a reference to the blood splatter scene by writing onReadyVar blood_splatter equals preload and the path to the scene. To get the path of a scene in Godot, find the scene in your project folders, right-click on it, and select Copy Path from the menu. Then in the melee function, write var b equals bloodsplatter.instance, which prepares the blood splatter scene to appear in the game. And then write b.globaltransform.origin equals body.globaltransform.origin, which sets the enemy's location as the blood spawn location. Then write getTree.getRoot.addChildB, and this actually spawns in the blood. Run the game, and now the enemies bleed when we smack them with the hammer. Thanks for watching. Links to my Discord, Twitter, and computer setup down below. Like, subscribe, and bell icon to support the channel. And if you're feeling extra generous, consider supporting the channel directly by buying me a coffee, links down below, and a huge thank you to everyone who has shown me their support already. Anyways, thanks for watching, and have a nice day.